you know, we can't get into specifics on some cases because of confidentiality, but we can say this. Bob and I went to see, after having met with the family already, to see a client who was in the ICU, having been involved in a very bad car accident with brain damage. And while we're sitting there, the nurse comes up to our client's wife and says, we want to pull the plug. We just don't think that he's going to make it, and you should really consider that. She's devastated.
They're talking about end-of-life decisions here, and you know, right in front of us, and
right.
it's only a few weeks post-accident, but
right.
the person's brain injury is so severe that they're wondering whether there's going to be any recovery. So here we're in the middle of this, and all we can do is give our input, our expertise, sometimes just a shoulder to lean on, you know, to help these people through these devastating circumstances. Right. And to go that alone, I can't imagine how someone could do it. And so then it goes to that. Then you get into issues like, let's say the person has health insurance, hopefully, these days, you never yes. know. Mm-hmm. And the health insurance company's job is to pay for what they feel are covered expenses, things that they're supposed to pay for. But in cases like this, where they might need extremely right. specialized care, possibly out of state, you oftentimes can end up in situations where you're trying to convince these health insurance carriers to provide this coverage right. for these people.
So that's another function.
Oh, and
absolutely.
We did that in this case.
Yeah.
This person needed to be out of state. And first of all, just to go back to the story, the woman, you know, leaned on us to help make a decision like that, which really
there was no decision for her at that point
yeah,
because she wasn't going to let that happen.
Clearly not where she wanted to be, and we just basically told her legally you do not have to make that decision right now. It's still very early. Let him continue to hopefully recover, see where he goes. And she did. And he came to the point where he was able to be moved to another facility, and then Bob actually helped negotiate with the health insurance company to get them to agree to move him out of state to get the real specialized care that he needed in this particular instance.
And that was a godsend for them. That helped him make tremendous progress.
Very, very good
yeah.
recovery.
Yeah. Is that where we're finally getting to the place of what about the money? Somewhere, if the health insurance or the insurance has to pay for, never mind what's being paid for in-state, but then out-of-state, long-term, forever, however that, how do you walk down that road? What is that process about? Well, I don't know what, if I'm that wife, I don't know what I'm going to need. What kinds of things do I need to be thinking of?
That's exactly right. And there are short-term solutions and long-term solutions. As this is all going on, and some of this care and recovery can take years.
Right. The
people have to live. So now maybe one of the breadwinners in the house isn't working. What happens? Well, in Rhode Island, we're blessed to have TDI, which almost everyone pays into, which is a 6-month short-term disability program. So there's some income coming into the house. Then if there's serious enough an injury and it looks like it's going to last a long time, we look at Social Security disability for the person, which picks up after 6 months of disability if someone's totally disabled. So again, we're walking these people through all these steps to get income. On top of that, there's the medical care and making sure that Blue Cross or whoever is taking care of the medical needs and they're getting the right care. That's all short-term.
Right.
There may be private disability insurance policies as well that they have.
Private long-term disability or short-term disability or group from work sometimes people have. But what Bob is explaining is now we're taking on the role of trying to help these people through their current situation. And in both the case of this woman we represented who had the quadriplegic paralysis and the fellow with the brain damage, there now has to be, as he was starting to talk about, the long-term planning. They plateau after a certain point of time in where they're going to recover to. What is their care going to have to be? And Bob and I have developed a rapport with a number of different companies that do what's called a case management plan or a care plan to take a look at what are the needs going to be down the road. And that's a big component of what would go into determining what a value of this type of case would be and how to settle it.
So now you're talking about what the person actually needs for care. But there's also an issue that people talk about, well, that car that caused it, that was a negligent driver. Maybe it was innocent but negligent. Maybe there was another kind of personal injury that was maybe malicious versus it being innocent. All of those things end up becoming, never mind contentious, they end up being litigated. Where does that fit into the overall picture? Yes, you have to cover my medical needs, its expenses, my long-term care, and then there's what about that aspect of it?
Very good question. While you're helping with these I'd call it these short-term life decisions, care, income,
Right.
You are talking about in a personal injury setting, an automobile accident, a fall, a medical negligence case perhaps.
Right.
You're talking about the legal aspects of who caused this, what caused this, was there negligence or you know, lack of care.
Who's responsible?
Right. Who's responsible for this person's damages? And many, many times, especially in larger cases, you're going to get a fight because the money, the consequences are grave for the responsible party. In workers' comp, it's a little bit different, and we haven't talked about that in the show in a while, but workers' comp is a no-fault law, essentially. Workers' comp takes fault or negligence out of the equation. All workers' comp wants to know is, did the injury happen on the job or not?
Period.
Right.
Black, white.
That's not always as simple as you think it is either.
Oh, okay.
Believe me, we have a case now, which I can't get into, where it's a very serious catastrophic injury, but there are questions being raised about, did this happen on the job or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that always can come up, but it does take away the whole need to prove negligence or misconduct or improper conduct in a workers'
It's a
comp
different
setting.
proof that you need. It's
Right.
did the injury arise out of the course of the employment? And you, as you said, your first instinct is, well, that's pretty easy. You're working or you're not. Yeah, well, the person who is a visiting nurse who's driving in her car from one job to the other, is she working as she's
Took
driving?
a lunch break along the way. Is that a
So
deviation?
there
We
are
used to
always-
call
okay,
it,
there's always gray area.
Yeah,
Gray
always.
area.
It's always fact-driven, and you have to look at the facts of each case individually.
But the question is, yes, there are legal decisions being made all along while the focus is on helping these people through this traumatic situation.
And part of what we're doing during this period of time is making sure that we tie up what the liability is. For instance, if it's a slip and fall, we want to get out to the place where this happened and perhaps videotape it, look for what the issues are in that situation. In the particular one we were referring to, there was no railing, and that violates the building code at the time that this place was built. And so we're now going to go out and hire an architect or design
Or
expert,
experts, engineers.
to take a look at it and tell us that, yes, this is negligence. In fact, it's what we'd call negligence per se, because it violates a code or a building code in Rhode Island. Or in an auto accident, get the police report, the accident reconstruction report if there is one, and perhaps in the case we had, hire our own accident reconstructionist to look at the accident, how it happened, and tell us who's at fault for this.
Because many times if your client's injured badly enough, they can't tell you what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
When all this is going on, I can imagine that someone may want certainly the medical taken care of immediately, but also the money taken care of immediately. I want to know what I get. I want it now. I need to know right now. But I also understand, too, and as you've described, some of these cases could go on for a while, and I guess, I don't know if it's workers' comp, but some of them may take a longer period of time. There are middlemen. There are firms that do just settlement. Can you explain that to us a little bit? Those firms are not necessarily legal firms, so does that mean that they're not likely to handle the legal aspect that's suit-worthy, but rather just get money, close the deal, and close the door?
They're funding firms, I think, is what you're referring to.
I think that's what you're getting to. Yeah, these companies will do will sometimes lend people money who have a case.
And that's a concern.
Right.
Sure it is, because, and again, that's where a lawyer really needs to be involved, because sometimes their terms can be pretty predatory, you know, really, really difficult on people. Again, there are some better companies that do that, and there are some not so good companies that do that. So we tend to shy away from those, because you'll see that the interest rates tend to be incredibly high, and just add on to a point where, and you can't always control how long a case is going to go before there's a resolution.
Right.
But some people are desperate, and they have no place else to turn, and they'll go that route. But we strongly encourage most people against it, but there are circumstances where it can work for a short term.
Our counsel generally is, if you can survive financially some other way, do it. Don't get involved with these companies. And frankly, I've heard of lawyers that front money. That is unethical. And if you're doing that with a lawyer, the lawyer's violating the canons of ethics.
Before we talk about the money, I really do want to talk about that settlement issue. Some are no fee, some are you pay the fee only if we settle. How does that work? What are those alternatives about? Could you explore that a little bit?
Sure. Typically, with workers' comp or personal injury, the good news for the client is you don't have to come in and hand the lawyer a bunch of money to hire him. If you come into in a family court situation, which David does and Jackie does, most of the time you're going to have to pay that lawyer a retainer. The lawyer's going to kind of take the landscape of the case, decide how much work is probably going to be involved, try to be fair to you in terms of how much you can pay, and quote you a fee based on that, and then that money will have to be paid immediately and then billed against over time. In